You are no longer my daughter. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They came out of my mother's mouth like a surgical incision, clean, cold, final. It was Christmas Eve in Vermont. Snow was falling outside, dusting the porch of my parents' colonial farmhouse in Middlebury. Inside, the fireplace glowed, the scent of roasted duck and cinnamon still hanging in the air. The table was set for 6, but all eyes were on me. I had just told them I wasn't going back to Columbia Law. Told them I had dropped out 2 months ago. Told them that I was moving to Detroit to start a nonprofit tech lab for high school girls in underserved neighborhoods. No one moved. No one spoke, except her. Marcia Whitmore, my mother, former state senator, current federal judge, holder of 3 honorary degrees and 18 grudges. I always believed she loved me. Maybe she did, but not more than she loved legacy. My dad, Gregory Whitmore, looked down at his untouched plate. The silverware in his hands trembled slightly. He didn't say a word. He never did when it counted. Everything we gave you, she said, still perfectly composed. Every opportunity. You're throwing it away for what? A hobby? It's not a hobby, I replied, and even though my voice shook, I made myself look her in the eye. It's a lab. It's education. It's opportunity. Just not the kind you care about. That's when she said it. You are no longer my daughter. My name is Greer Whitmore. I'm 27 years old, and that was the night I lost my family and found myself. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just picked up my coat, walked through the perfect white foyer, and stepped into the Vermont snow. Behind me, the Whitmore Christmas continued. Silent, holy, and deeply conditional. I was born into the Whitmore family, like an heir is born into a monarchy, not asked, just assigned. My crib had custom embroidery that read Future Supreme Court Justice. My childhood birthday parties were full of campaign donors and catered by firms with NDAs. My Halloween costumes? Sandra Day O'Connor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Elena Kagan 3 years in a row. At first, I played along. How could I not? When you're a kid, you think that love looks like laminated chore charts and Ivy League admissions planning at age 9. That obedience is loyalty. That approval equals affection. And it worked for a while. I got perfect grades. I was debate team captain by sophomore year. I interned at my mother's office in D.C. during high school summers and had breakfast twice with members of Congress before I turned 17. My older brother, Callum, was the golden boy. Harvard Law, clerked for a federal judge. Now a partner at Whitmore and Dreyfus LLP. The and Whitmore part, obviously, named after our mother. He was everything they wanted. I was the other one. The one who asked questions like, what if I don't want to be a lawyer? What if I care more about people than policy? What if justice isn't just for the courtroom? The cracks began in undergrad at Brown. I took a computer science class by accident. It was the only elective that fit into my schedule. We were building basic AI models for educational tools. I watched a 14-year-old girl in Newark learn algebra with a chatbot we had coded. Her name was Amaya. She sent our team a video of herself screaming when she finally passed her math test. I played it 15 times. That moment did more for me than all the awards in my parents' glass cabinet. But of course, I didn't tell them. You don't confess blasphemy in church. After graduation, I applied to Columbia Law because that's what was expected. And I got in because that's what Whitmores do. But while my classmates argued tort reform and case law, I spent my nights scribbling prototypes for a platform that could teach logic and critical thinking to teenage girls through storytelling and simple code. My professors called me distracted. My mother called me embarrassing. I called it a slow death in a $74,000 a year prison. The tipping point came in my second year. A girl named Nia came to speak at an outreach event I was volunteering for in Harlem. 17 years old, second-generation immigrant, self-taught coder. She had built an app to help her community report housing violations in real time to the city. No funding, no formal education, just fire. And I thought, she's doing more for justice than I ever will in this building. I dropped out the next day. Didn't tell anyone except my roommate. Rented a tiny apartment above a pawn shop in Detroit. and began writing the code that would become Signal Fire Labs. But all of that came later. First, I had to lose everything my parents believed gave me value. And that loss, that rupture, that is where real identity begins. Detroit wasn't a fresh start. It was a demolition. I moved in February, the cruel kind of winter where even your bones feel betrayed. My apartment was above a pawn shop that doubled as a vape store, with cracked pipes and a heater that worked when it felt like it. I had a mattress on the floor, a folding chair from Craigslist, and a secondhand ThinkPad that buzzed like a beehive whenever I opened Chrome. That was all I needed. I told myself that every empire starts somewhere. I reminded myself that the tech gods, Jobs, Musk, Gates, had garages. I had a two-room shoebox with mold in the corners and raccoons in the alley. Same thing, right? Except I wasn't building an empire. I was building Signal Fire Labs, a nonprofit tech incubator for high school girls in low-income neighborhoods. The vision was simple: teach them to code, think critically, and launch projects that actually mattered, from food delivery apps in food deserts to online platforms for teen mental health. But vision is cheap when you can't afford groceries. I applied to 23 grants in 3 months. Rejected by 22. The one I did get was for $500, and it came with so many reporting requirements it may as well have been a trap. I emailed hundreds of potential partners. Most didn't respond. Some did, just to tell me I wasn't scalable or competitive in the impact space. My savings, what was left of it after Columbia, evaporated like breath on glass. I took contract work writing bios for startup founders who wore Patagonia vests and said things like, "We're democratizing blockchain." They were all men, all funded, all confident. Meanwhile, I was skipping meals and building a curriculum from scratch. My day started at 6 a.m. and ended at 2 a.m. I was everything: founder, coder, curriculum designer, HR, janitor. Sometimes I would go 2 days without speaking to another human being. The silence in that apartment was sharp. It made me doubt everything. What if I'm wrong? What if Mom was right? What if all I've done is sabotage my own future? There were nights I sat on the floor, eating cereal with water because I'd run out of milk, staring at the ceiling, wondering if anyone would ever take me seriously again. But still, I kept going, because one thing did work. I had managed to get 3 girls, all juniors at Mumford High, to show up every Saturday to the public library. I brought laptops and granola bars and hope. We built chatbots. We made a digital zine. One of them, Samaya, told me she wanted to be a justice engineer. I asked her what that meant. She said, "Someone who builds tools that fix the world." That kept me warm through a Detroit winter. It happened on a Wednesday. The kind where your hands hurt just from typing in the cold. I had just finished a painfully awkward Zoom call with a local foundation that basically told me, in so many words, "We don't fund passion projects run by people without institutional backing." I smiled, nodded, thanked them for their time, then slammed my laptop shut and yelled into a pillow like a deranged ghost. I had $81 left in my checking account. That afternoon, I got a LinkedIn message from someone named Theo Maldonado. I almost didn't open it. I was too tired, too bitter, too skeptical. But the name rang a faint bell. I clicked. "Hey Greer. I'm Theo. We met briefly at the Columbia Civic Tech Mixer 2 years ago. I came across a tweet about your program in Detroit. We should talk. I work with the Delta Current Fund now. We're exploring grassroots edtech initiatives." I read it 5 times before I realized I was holding my breath. Delta Current Fund was no joke. They backed mission-first tech with real teeth, startups that built clean water sensors for Flint, refugee housing platforms, AI-powered therapy bots for teen suicide prevention. I answered within 45 seconds. We had coffee, virtually, of course. Theo wore a beanie and wireframe glasses, and spoke like someone who had once been burned out but had turned the ashes into compost.
He didn't waste time.
"I've read your grant deck," he said, sipping from a mug that said "code" like a girl. "It's raw, but it's good. What you're doing, you've got traction without money. That's what I like to see." I blinked. Someone was validating me? "I'm not promising anything yet," he added. but we're looking to fund 6 experimental initiatives next quarter. And you're on the shortlist. The call ended in 23 minutes. But something shifted. Not just in the air, but in me. That night I stayed up until 3 a.m. reworking my pitch deck. I added data, testimonials, screenshots of our student projects. I outlined a 12-month growth plan. I took out the word maybe from every sentence. 3 days later, I had a second meeting, this time with Delta's entire program committee. It was me, in a thrifted blazer, speaking from a borrowed conference room at a local rec center, trying to act like I wasn't vibrating with nerves. I told them what I believed. We don't just teach girls to code. We teach them to think critically, lead fearlessly, and build technology that serves people, not profits. This isn't a pilot. It's a blueprint. When I finished, there was silence. Then someone smiled, and Theo gave me a thumbs up. 2 weeks later, I got the call. Greer, Delta's in $250,000 over 18 months. No equity. Full discretion. Congratulations. You're officially one of our portfolio leaders. I sat on the edge of my twin bed and let the words crash over me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't millions. It wasn't Forbes. But it was everything. It was fuel. It was faith. It was the first time I could look at myself and think, maybe I was never wrong. Maybe I was just early. The money didn't change everything, but it changed enough. I moved into a better apartment, nothing fancy, just a clean loft near Eastern Market with heating that worked and windows that opened without a crowbar. I bought a real desk, a standing whiteboard, and a coffee machine that didn't hiss like a snake. Signal Fire Labs became real. We hired our first curriculum lead, Tara, a former high school teacher from Atlanta who had quit public education after too many budget cuts and not enough respect. We brought on a UX designer from Seattle who worked pro bono 2 days a week. We rented a co-working space with fiber internet and a creaky freight elevator that somehow made it feel earned. By fall, we had 6 partner schools in 3 cities.
Detroit,
Milwaukee, Baltimore. 32 students. 4 instructors. 1 goal: teach girls how to build tools that fix broken systems. One of our first student-led projects was an app called Fresh Route, a tool that mapped food deserts and connected local pantries to volunteers who could deliver groceries to households with no car or access to transit. It made the local news, then regional news, then an op-ed in The Atlantic titled, "What a 17-year-old in Milwaukee can teach Silicon Valley about impact." The girl behind it, Zari, texted me, "I'm going to do a TED Talk one day, Ms. Greer." I replied, "You better." In November, Wired ran a feature on the rise of underground edtech. They mentioned Signal Fire Labs in a paragraph, but it was enough to catch the eye of a few VC firms. I got emails, invitations. Let's grab coffee. Let's talk expansion. Let's talk numbers. But I wasn't in a rush. This wasn't about a Series A. This was about getting it right. At the same time, I was invited to join the National Task Force on Educational Equity through Technology, a federal advisory board formed under the new administration. I'd be the youngest member, the only one without a PhD, the only one with raccoon-stained ceilings in my not-so-distant past. And through it all, I told no one in my family, not a word. Every time they texted, rare and awkward, I answered vaguely, "Yeah, still in Detroit. Just working on a few things. Taking time to figure stuff out." They didn't ask for details. They didn't really want to know. I watched from afar as Callum got featured in The American Lawyer for redefining modern family law. My mother gave a commencement speech at Yale Law that was reshared on CSBN and LinkedIn by half the judiciary. None of them knew that a nonprofit I started in a basement had just won a national award from the Department of Education. None of them knew that my girls were getting internship offers from Microsoft and Mozilla. None of them knew that when people in my field said Greer Whitmore, they didn't think disappointment. They thought disruptor. I could have told them. I could have sent articles, emails,
proof.
But something in me held back. I wasn't ready to offer them my story. Not when they were still clinging to their version of me. The one who had failed. The one who walked away from greatness. It was easier, somehow, to succeed in silence. Because one day I knew I wouldn't need to tell them. The world would. Thanksgiving came with early snow that year. The kind that makes old houses creak and memories rise like fog from the ground. It had been 11 months since I left that dining room in Vermont. 11 months since my mother erased me with a sentence. 11 months since I started building something she never imagined I was capable of. And now I was going back. I drove up from Detroit in a rented hybrid SUV, arriving the night before. I stayed in a hotel across town instead of the guest room at home. I didn't mention that it was the same hotel hosting the Regional Tech Summit, where I'd be giving a keynote the next day. That could wait. The Whitmore house looked the same. White columns, blue shutters, a front porch that could have been pulled straight from a political ad. I stood there with a pie from a boutique bakery in hand, like a contestant on a reality show called Prodigal Daughter, Reheated. My father opened the door. His eyes flickered with something unreadable. My mother appeared behind him, immaculate as always, slate-gray dress, pearls, lips pursed like punctuation. Callum and his fiancée, Harper, were already inside. She was a mergers and acquisitions lawyer with perfect posture and teeth that looked like non-disclosure agreements. Dinner began like every Whitmore dinner, efficient, elegant, emotionally arid. They made small talk. Harper talked about hedge fund clients. Callum brought up new legislation on digital wills. My mother nodded with a look of imperial boredom. I chewed slowly, letting them fill the air with noise. Then came the pivot, the one I knew was coming. "So, Greer," my mother said, placing her wine glass down with surgical precision. "What are your plans now that you've had time to reflect?" She said it like she was offering me a ladder back into the tower I had burned. I looked around the table, every face expecting one of two things: apology or excuse. Instead, I said, "I run a nonprofit that teaches girls in underfunded schools how to build tech that solves problems in their communities." My father blinked. Callum frowned. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "We've deployed programs in 3 cities, partnered with public schools. We just received a $250,000 grant from Delta Current Fund. I was appointed to a federal task force last month." Silence. Then my mother, "You mean like coding camps?"
No.
"Like future engineers, designers, activists. Like girls who are going to outbuild half of Silicon Valley before they turn 18. Callum cleared his throat. "And you make a living doing this?" "I do. We're expanding next year. And we just secured a partnership with MIT's Open Learning Initiative." Harper let out a soft, stunned, "Oh wow." My mother leaned back in her chair, her face unreadable, but her knuckles were white around the stem of her glass. "That's quite a pivot," she said at last.
No, I said.
"It's a mission. One that exists outside the boundaries of your version of success." And then she said it, cold, clipped, as if she was performing surgery. "It's not too late to come back. Law school will still take you. We can help." "No," I interrupted. "You don't get to offer rescue from something I never needed saving from." My voice didn't rise, but it landed. "You erased me once because I didn't follow your script. But I've written my own. And it's already in print, whether you read it or not." They didn't ask any more questions. The table went silent. Even Harper looked uncomfortable, like she'd accidentally walked into a deposition she wasn't cleared for. I stood up before dessert. "Thanks for dinner," I said, my voice steady. "But I won't stay for the pie this year." I left without another word, stepping back into the snowy quiet, the sound of my boots on gravel louder than anything that had been said at that table. I drove to the hotel, pulled out my laptop, and reviewed my slides for tomorrow's keynote. The title of my talk: "When the System Says No, Rewriting Your Future Anyway." The ballroom was packed. Rows of chairs filled with educators, technologists, investors, faces lit by stage light and phone screens. The podium was flanked by 2 massive banners that read, "Innovation Begins Where Equity Lives." I stepped onto the stage wearing black slacks, a cobalt blazer, and a pin that one of my students had 3D printed. It said code like you mean it in blocky neon letters. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had something to prove. I felt like I had something to share. My keynote wasn't about my family, but they were in it between the lines. I told the story of a girl named Tanaya who used Signal Fire Labs to build an app that connected immigrant families with translation volunteers at her school. I talked about Keisha, who wrote an algorithm to track predatory lending in her neighborhood. I showed the crowd a heat map of our student projects, from West Detroit to East Baltimore. When we give girls the tools to design their own future, I said, they don't just build apps. They build escape routes, bridges, blueprints. They build justice. Applause. Real, sustained. Not polite. Not rehearsed. Just honest. Afterward, as people lined up to speak with me, not out of obligation but because they were moved, I felt a shift. Not in the room. In me. I had spent a year trying to prove that walking away from the Whitmore legacy wasn't a failure. But now, standing there, business cards in hand, praise in my ears, and a future in motion, I realized something. I never needed to prove I wasn't a failure. I just needed to stop accepting their definition of success. That night in the hotel, I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. Same face, same eyes, but different posture. I wasn't the girl they erased. I was the woman I created. I didn't need a seat at their table anymore. I had built a better one. And the chairs were filled with voices they would never hear, but that mattered more than any courtroom applause ever could. In a few weeks, Greer receives an email from Callum. Her mother is nominated for another federal appointment, and the press is starting to ask about the estranged daughter running the equity lab. He wants to talk. She doesn't reply, at least not yet. Because this time, she's in control of the narrative.